According to census data, roughly 3,000 teens ages 13 to 17 identify as transgender in Tennessee alone. And this case could have implications beyond Tennessee, with 26 other states passing similar restrictions.
Just 3,000 self-ID in the state of Tennessee. We're not even talking about like they've gone in for any kind of surgery or whatever. Literally just talking about self-ID. There's like 5 trans people
on gender-affirming care for minors. So let's talk more about this with GLAAD President and CEO Sarah Kate Ellis here with me in studio. Sarah Kate, thank you for coming in. Let's just start with your concerns here. What are your biggest worries with the potential outcome of this case?
My biggest worries is that what you're seeing happening across the country is going to be emboldened to happen even more, which is now over half the states in this country are banning gender care for teens and youth. And I think that what we're up against is these are kids who have been around forever. Like, I just want to pull us back for a second, because we're talking about health care here. We're talking about kids and teens and youth. And we're talking about a community that has existed forever. And in 2020, there were no bans against these kids. And now there are more than half the states in this country banning this kind of life-saving care for these kids. That's health care. And I think what's happened in that time period from 2020 to now is that the trans community has been politicized. And this is a political battle, not a health care battle. Because
yeah, of course, like the big litmus test for this is this gigantic wave of pushback coming after a new series of scientific discoveries, or is it coming because politicians decided to make it an issue? And if the latter, well, then there you go. So it's not medical, it's political.
All of the major American medical associations approve this health care for kids, for the youth. And so these are choices and conversations that happen between families and doctors. And now we're taking it to courts, and we're taking it into policy and legislation and politics. And it doesn't need to be there.
What's your response to what we heard?
Just finished listening to this argument in full. I hope they knock this down. Or are you a masochist? I guess you're in my chat, so you must be. You listen to Supreme Court arguments on social issues, the current Supreme Court? What, you want to hear the Republican opposition, like, spend, like, several days floundering, flustering, not able to get a coherent answer or explanation out, getting grilled by even the conservative justices, and then inexplicably 6 months later, the justices are like, actually, we're ruling in their favor. You like that? I don't do that.
In that piece, the critics saying, listen, we ban kids from doing lots of things. They're not allowed to smoke cigarettes. They're not allowed to drink alcohol. They're not allowed to do these things that potentially make decisions that are life-altering for them. What's your response to that? That kids are just too young to make these decisions and could potentially be doing something.
Meanwhile, the French Society of Pediatric Endocrinology and Diabetology is recommending affirming trans care. All of them do. All of the medical associations across the West advocate for it. The only reason there's been any pushback is because it's been highly politicized. Even when, like, the NHS and, like, Switzerland, or what, not Switzerland, was it Finland, Sweden, whatever the Scandinavian country, when they pulled back on their support for trans-affirming or gender-affirming care for trans youth, it was after a wave of political pushback. It wasn't from, like, an internal medical or scientific discovery, you know?
That will impact them for years to come.
Yeah, so I would just start at the core of that argument, which is those are bad things. Smoking cigarettes, they're proven. Tattoos, tattoos aren't bad, but they're things that are different and not necessary. This is life-saving medicine. We're talking about not treating people for diabetes if they're youth. What are we talking about? We can't compare that to smoking cigarettes. Your life-affirming and life-saving medical care, I think they're two different things, and we're arguing something, you know, I think protecting...
Of course, it's worth remembering that, like, the political pushback from the Republicans is about trans people being degenerates, not about, like, many conservatives and fascists know trans people are happier and healthier getting gender-affirming care. They just don't care. Like, the medical argument, the argument in favor of the argument in favor of like making people's lives better, that's about reaching like the majority of people, even a lot of Republican voters, because there are a lot of Republican voters. Like, The average Republican voter is not waking up and going, yes, I oppose trans or gender affirming care for trans youth because I want them to suffer. Yeah, like that. There are plenty of them like that, like people who are like militantly fascist, like anti-degenerate or whatever. But for the most part, the American people who oppose gender affirming care for trans youth do so because they think it hurts them. So these arguments, while they don't get at the core of like the Republican messaging, they are still essential for a lot of people.
Kids absolutely is in all of our best interest, and this does protect them. This gives them the life that they need and that they want, and so I think it's a really important factor to take into consideration. What are we really discussing here?
Now, a Gallup poll from June finds a slim majority of U.S. adults say changing gender is morally wrong. What's your
remember the thing we just saw? 6 in 10 adults opposed laws banning gender affirming care for minors, but also by a 2-point margin, American adults think it's morally wrong to change your gender. The median voter, everyone.
Response to that, and how is your organization working within that context?
Sorry, not by 2 point. It's not 51-49. It's 51 versus like 44 or 5 undecided.
Text.
So my response to that is, if you think about it, only 30% of Americans say they know somebody who's transgender. So a lot of these responses are coming from people who haven't met people who are trans, who don't understand the journey.
What moral implications are there to changing your gender? Who are you sliding in that scenario? Dude, new wave of fascism. It hits everyone. Everyone. It's not about the argument, man. It's just about people's vibe.
And don't understand what those folks are up against. And so when you have 70% of the population in America making decisions based on politicians politicizing a community, you're going to see numbers like that because they haven't met trans people. This is a human rights issue.
Keep in mind, like, a bunch of people thought miscegenation was immoral as well. Like, that was within lifetime for a lot of boomers, so...
This isn't a political issue, and it's been politicized for gain. And so I think it's really critical that we look at what we're talking about here, which is human dignity.
Given that, do you think having more trans people in the public eye, for example, we're about to see the first trans senator with Senator Sarah.
Okay, just to give you an idea of how bad America is, of white adults in America, in 1995, only 45% of them approved of interracial marriage. This is 1 year after I was born. For non-white adults, it was about 2/3 at the time. We have been careening towards 100% approval, but still to this day. I bet you that if you go to the current day, the numbers have ticked down a little bit. Like, even after the Civil Rights Act was passed, 17% of white adults. 1/3 of non-white adults is still a massive number. Yeah, but it is worth noting that for a lot of non-white adults, like, largely at the time black people, keep in mind, their opposition to interracial marriage had a lot more to do with, like, fear of racial violence and cultural assimilation. Like, when white grandparents say, I don't want my granddaughter coming home with a black man, they're not doing that because they're, like, worried about like their granddaughter being victimized by racists or what, like that's not, there's an element of that, but for the most part, like there's a much greater like dynamic of hate, you know? Don't want to be kicked out of the country club. True.
Sarah McBride entering the Senate in January. Do you think that changes that conversation if people see more examples in public?
1,000,000%. It's the whole premise of our organization is representation matters. It's a double-edged sword, though, right? With that representation, like Sarah McBride saw, she saw a backlash at Congress where they're trying now to police where she can go to the bathroom.
Yeah, I liked her bold strategy of, all right, I'll accept your policing.
People have been going to the bathroom in those halls for years and years and years.
McBride's a senator. Why did I think she was in the House? She is in the House. She's not a senator. She misspoke.
Decades, but now they're making it a political fight. So I do think the more we see and meet trans people, the more they're humans, and they can't be then created into these boogie people who live in closets and are dangerous for society. They're actually just your neighbors and your friends and your family who want to contribute to society like everybody else in America.
And what's your message to parents who aren't morally opposed to this, but are also worried that if their daughter likes playing with boy toys, or if their son likes pink, for example, that they might be pushed in this direction?
With boy toys.
you know, it's almost laughable as a gay woman who grew up in a straight world. You know, it's so on its head. Nobody's pushing anybody towards anything. And I think that is insulting to LGBTQ people at our core, that we were pushed into being gay or trans. It's how you feel inside, how you want to love, how you want to express yourself, and what's core to who you are. And I think...
Isn't it crazy how, in retrospect, the peak of transgender rights in America was probably 2015? Like, possibly over the course of our entire lifetime. Probably not our entire lifetime if you're young, but like, if you're old and watching, maybe your entire lifetime, that would be like the peak, and then you kind of have a slow decline since, or maybe a very rapid decline. I legit thought it was firmly accepted at this point. Well, I'm sure they thought that in 1929 as well, in Berlin. 2020? No, not 2020.
Trying to minimize that to you can be pushed into it is just that, minimizing it.
The emote doesn't work. Thana broke it. By which I mean I broke it and Thana was watching and didn't magically solve it.
And if you do have a loved one who is trans, what's your advice to either someone who may be trans and feels, you know, worried about the future, worried about how to talk about this, or someone who has a loved one who is and wants to know how to support them?
My first piece of advice is always to find safe places to have those discussions, because it's such a vulnerable moment in your life and such a critical moment in your life when you're coming out as gay or trans or anything.
Yeah, so anyway, how many views did this get? This got 8 views. That's great. Let's see. Where else was this covered? Ah, yes.
So to the trans activists over there claiming...
Outside the Supreme Court today.
This is all about the rights of children. I say again, yes, you're right, it is. They have a right to be protected from you. Children have a right to be protected from all of those people over there who want to harm them and damage them and destroy them. And they will be. They are going to lose. They are losing right now. We are not going to let them harm our children. This case is just the beginning of the fight. It is not the end.
Who's jumping? A protester trying to block the camera.
We are not going to rest until every child is protected, until trans ideology is entirely erased from the earth. That's what we're fighting for, and we will not stop until we achieve it.
Yeah, I wouldn't be too optimistic about this ruling. Just gonna throw that one out there. Remember when he was on the Joe Rogan show, back before Joe Rogan was completely bought by the right? And he was like, yeah, something like 500 million children have their breasts cut off every year or something, I don't know. And Joe Rogan was like, well, but how, wait, are you sure? Because we just pulled up the number and it's actually like 2. Didn't you do a movie on this? Shouldn't you know that? And Matt Walsh just kind of like, didn't answer. I remember. Remember when he talked about the fertility of 16-year-old girls? I remember that, yeah. It was a classic Matt Walsh moment. And when he was saying that children need to be protected from them, he was actually pointing at a mirror, just slightly out of frame of the camera. It was actually a wonderful moment of self-awareness from him, and we're not giving him the credit he deserves. Matt Walsh is genuinely one of the most ideologically evil people alive. I have bad news for you. His positions are normal for the median Republican pundit and politician. Like, he's pretty much just like... the only reason you might not think that is because you're used to hearing people like Ben Shapiro talk, who still maintain an artifice of like logical consistency and so on. But for like a modern Republican politician or pundit or newscaster, this is pretty much like the median. Is he worse than Jordan Peterson? I don't know, because Jordan Peterson's like actually not mentally well, so it's hard to gauge where he's at exactly.